Ladies, it is so good to see you. It's really an honor, actually, because it's very rare that I have the opportunity to address you in the presence of your moras, and so an unusual time. I told Lonnie that I'm used to speaking right after hearing how beautiful our davening was. It's a little bit of a different context. I wanted to ask you, ladies, the following question: how many of you think that change is difficult? How many of you think that change is difficult?
Depends what type of change.
It does depend on what type of change. That is true. How many of you think that change is particularly difficult at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning? Sort of kind of like you're in your sleep and all of a sudden something unusual happens. Okay. So I'm going to give you a context that occurred to me today. And it was an unusual circumstance because I woke up at 4:05 this morning in order to be able to make sure that I caught my flight to be here on time today. And I looked at my phone to see if there were any messages from the evening, nothing unusual. And so I figured everything was in order. And just to be sure, I went to the website of the airline that I would be flying to make sure that the flight was on time, because sometimes things happen. And there's a lot of timing that goes on when you're returning a rental car, going back to the airport. So I went to the website only to see that the flight was canceled. And I'm getting nervous at that point already because it's a little bit less than 2 hours for my flight. What am I going to do? I call up the airline. Oh, we put you on a 10 o'clock flight, not a problem. I said, a little bit of a problem. And thankfully they were able to call up another airline carrier and get me on a different airline, 6 o'clock flight, and Baruch Hashem, I was able to return. So why do I mention that to you, ladies? Because I was thinking of a story in this week's Parsha that's involved with change. Someone in particular who comes in the beginning of the Parsha, we don't really see it directly, we kind of hear about it afterwards. Somebody whose behavior changes, I would even suggest radically, between the beginning of the Parsha and more the center of the Parsha. When he's with others in a small group, he behaves in one way, and he's with the larger group, he behaves in a different way. Does anyone know possibly who I might be referring to? And this person ultimately is considered a hero in the story that we're reading about. Let's see here. Tchelet, who do you think it is?
Yehoshua.
You think it's Yehoshua. Who do you think it is? You think it's Kalev. Shana, who do you think? You think it's Kalev as well, and some others here also? Yeah? Okay. Yehoshua and Kalev were together. So certainly Yehoshua is a good answer, at least as it relates to being a hero in the story. He certainly was a hero. Kalev, on the other hand, seems to change personality somewhat, or at least behavioral tactics. Does anyone know what I'm referring to? What does Kalev do in the beginning of the Parsha, which we don't really read directly, and what does he do later on that is a shift from that behavior? Who have we not heard? Shifra, did you want to answer?
I had this, but I don't think it makes sense.
Broccoli, did you want to answer? No? You sure?
Okay, so with the Marauders, and he was
Yeah.
like acting like he was along with their plan about selling Lashkar, and then when they were reporting, he reported good.
Good. I don't know if everybody heard that. I'm going to come back to it in a sec. But before we do that, how did Yehoshua carry himself throughout this process? Does anybody know? How did Yehoshua carry himself? What was he doing all the time? Okay, who am I looking for? Ariella, is your hand up? No, you sure?
He was constantly saying, no, this is a bad idea, we should
So Yehoshua was saying, no, not a bad idea. And Kalev, let's say it again, loud and clear.
Yeah, he went along, he pretended to go along with the plan, but in his heart he was like thinking.
Okay, now, if I asked you, what's a better way to approach a situation where people are doing something inappropriate, how many of you would choose Kalev's strategy? I'm not here to judge, chas v'shalom. Each one is a very, so to speak, valid one. But I'm curious to know, how many of you, let's have a context here for a second. You have your friends and they're involved in a particular behavior. Maybe it's not such a great thing. How many of you would utilize the Kalev approach, so to speak? And how many of you would use Yehoshua's approach, which would be more straightforward and conventional and reprimanding? Let's do one finger for Kalev. And two, we'll do it like this, like the shortstops do to tell the outfielders that they're 2 outs. Okay, one for Kalev. Did I say one for Kalev? Yeah? Let's say one for Kalev. And two for Yehoshua. I'm just curious.
It depends.
So you think it depends.
Yeah.
Leah, what do you think?
How close that
You
is.
think Yehoshua? Okay? A lot of different opinions I'm seeing in the room as I look around. And probably we could each see circumstances where each one would be appropriate.
Because it depends how close I am with them.
Okay? It depends on how close you are,
And also how they would react to it.
how they might react to it. Why would somebody have a hard time, let's say, with the approach that Yehoshua used? Again, think about it just in our context. And I don't want anyone to think that we're in any way being critical, chas v'shalom. I'm simply asking, because what we have to do always is we have to say to ourselves, well, what is the Torah coming to teach us? When we see that somebody is trying to be influential and making a difference in a conversation, we have to learn lessons from what it is that they want to teach us. Go ahead, Ariella. Is there ever a time when somebody's doing something and you need to tell them right away, do not do that? Without taking the time to kind of soften your way into the conversation or develop. Zoe, you think so?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
To hurt someone.
Okay. Physical harm. What do you think?
Something dangerous.
Dangerous. What else? Is there anything spiritual, so to speak, where you may have to just say, that's not okay?
Yes.
Okay. If somebody, yes? Embarrassing somebody else? Okay, but then there are other times where we want to take, let's call it, a more gentle approach. There are other times where we might say to ourselves, you know what? If I go ahead and I approach that person head on like a raging bull in a china shop, or any other metaphor you'd like to use, what's going to happen? Have you ever had an experience like that where you went ahead and told somebody not to do something, but you were firm and very strong and didn't get the reaction that you wanted? Did anyone ever have that experience? Mm-hmm. Would anyone like to share? Schiffer, you want to share what that was?
If I said, no, you can't do this, then they might be like, oh, you're
defensive?
leaving me alone, like, you don't know.
And they're not really interested in hearing from you. Brachi?
They might like get mad at you,
And then what happens?
and then they'll do it like on purpose.
Ah,
just,
so
like,
then it may be actually,
Spite you.
it's spiteful behavior. One second, I see the same hands over and over. Yes,
So
Leigh.
sometimes they deny it. They're like, we did not do that, so you shouldn't say that to us.
Okay. So I think what we can learn from our parsha is something really very important. When we are looking to help somebody grow, I think the idea always has to be, instead of saying we're looking to make somebody change or to change somebody, the idea has to be, how do we help somebody be a better person? Not because we're here to change everybody else other than ourselves, but if we want to either do a chesed, we want to be an arev, right? Call Yisrael arevim zelazeh, whatever our motivation ultimately is, we sense that we have an obligation to help each other, to help somebody grow, to help somebody get through a particular situation. Different times, we may have different circumstances. But ultimately, the motivation has to be a positive motivation. Because we know, whether we look at Yehoshua and his approach, or Kalev and his approach, ultimately each one was beneficial. Ultimately, each one was deserving of reward. They're the only people of that entire generation from that particular age group that survived the experience in the Midbar. They had a special Yerusha in Eretz Yisrael, nobody else did. Because they stood up at a very, very difficult time, and they were willing and prepared to be unpopular. And that, by the way, is another thing that I wanted to focus on for just a moment. Because doing the right thing is not always popular. And I would argue that in today's day... Sorry.
Something for graduation.
Oh, okay,
That's
okay,
coded
okay.
by somebody's
Albert
girlfriend.
Einstein.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. I was getting nervous there for a second. I know what I did. But doing the right thing isn't
Always popular.
always
Popular isn't always right.
what people would appreciate. Is that better? Okay. And so what happens is we have this conundrum. Conundrum is a fancy word for saying problem. We have a problem. On the one hand, we feel like we want to help somebody grow. We really don't like how this behavior is going on, etc. On the other hand, we don't want to be a nudnik. We don't want to be a goody-goody. We don't want to be a whatever. They're not going to like me. How many of you have experienced this problem before? How many of you have felt like I have something maybe to say to a friend, but I'm not sure if I should? You've had that experience before? I've had it many, many times. Many, many times. And I deal with it every day here. And if I see something, do I say something? Do I not say something? How do I say it? What's the best way? We all have to think about that all the time. And so we may not be sophisticated enough. We're still in middle school. We're still growing. We're still learning relationships. And our relationships are new in a way because they're becoming more and more sophisticated, which by definition means they're becoming more and more complicated. And when those relationships do become more complicated, we then have to say to ourselves, well, what is the best approach? And sometimes we don't know the answer. Thankfully, you all have wonderful teachers, and you have other adults that care about you, your parents, administration, etc., that are here for you, and that are prepared to say to you, this is something that might be useful to consider. This is a way I would consider approaching it, etc. Maybe now is not a good time. Maybe it's best to leave it. Maybe have somebody else talk, whatever that might look like. But you should realize that there are different ways about with which to approach it. All of them can be correct if done l'shem shamayim. And if, in fact, your intentions are positive, your friends will hopefully see it. And ultimately, you will enhance your relationships and enhance everybody's behavior together as we continue to grow, to support each other, and to continue to provide positive role model and experiences for one another. Ladies, it was a pleasure. I was glad to be able to speak to you today. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos.